Hello YouTube. Today we're going to look at a inexpensive firearm, the Kel-Tec. This is the P-40 technically. This is a no-frills gun. It's about as simple as they come. Box O gun, built-in clip, 2 magazines, and I assume you just throw it in the river when you're done. So, I don't even know where to start with this. It is fairly straightforward, simple design. It is a double action only, and it, well, you'll see as we get into it. So, for stripping, put the gun in lock position, and then this is your takedown lever. It's designed so that you can actually pop it open with the back of a cartridge. So if you've got a round, so you can actually slip the back of the round in there, and it'll catch in that little lip, and you can pop it out. Obviously, a screwdriver works just as well. Once that's out, the barrel flops around, so when you're putting it back together, it's important to line things up. We have a double coil spring and a steel guide rod, which is actually kind of nice. The steel part. Barrel, relatively light because of how much it tilts. They've got this unusual bushing, but it actually does lock up relatively tight, so it's not terrible. Not too much to say about it. So let's just get into some of the rest of it, see what's going on here. There is no firing pin safety. Something hits our firing pin, it comes forward. It is not an inertial firing pin. If the firing pin is far enough forward, it will hit, but the hammer always leans on the firing pin. I think this is basically a dangerous design. That's why they have inertial firing pins and all the rest of it. Essentially, the hammer is always just leaning on that firing pin. It's got a very stiff firing pin return spring to fight against that. So I don't know that you could actually set it off without trying, but it just bugs me, weirds me out a little bit. So, to get the extraction system out, set the frame aside for now. I'm just going to drive this roll pin out. Oops, cracking the lights. And clear. Extractor is, fairly normal, well designed in general. I have seen on a couple of these that they're not particularly well timed. The extractor often needs to be fitted, where you need to remove a little material right along here to bring in the extractor claw just a little bit, and it's got this big old hefty extractor spring to push back out on it, and it does have an actual recessed hole, so that makes it easy to get back together. And then oddly, firing pin is retained by an Allen key. Let's see if I have the exact right hex wrench laying around already. And I don't think I do, but I'm going to check just in case this is the right one. Oh, that's too big. And so I'm going to find the right size. There we go. Survey says it's 3/32 And as I loosen this, there was a big thwack, and the reason I got my finger over the end is because the firing pin is no longer retained at that point. You can see what's going on in there is that the firing pin has a flat that Allen wrench is screwing down into that area that basically limits how far the firing pin can move. It just moves back and forth in that little ledge, and this hex screw is, take it the rest of the way out just so we can see how it engages. And it is just a standard, threaded hex screw. There's nothing fancy going on there. It's going to sit in the groove, and that's as far as the firing pin's going to actually be able to move. And at the same time, it keeps it from falling out of the gun. So there's no other parts to this slide. An important thing when dealing with this is if you put this back together and you can't if you over tighten that hex screw, then you'll have tightened down the firing pin all the way, so to speak, and it won't be able to move. So when you're putting this back in, you are going to have to be a little bit careful about that. Basically, you'll go in till it touches the firing pin, and then you'll have to back it off. Generally a good idea to put just a dab of Loctite on there. So basically I've got it a couple turns away from where it's going to need to be. I'm going to come in with something. We're going to make sure that it's still facing up, the right side up, which it is. And then I'm going to push down this to get the firing pin in there as I screw it in those last couple turns. And at this point, now the firing pin is over retained. It doesn't pop back out at all, which is what we were just talking about. And as I loosen it just a snitch, whoop, now the firing pin pops out. And so now I can move this without bumping into it. I'm going to back this off another quarter turn to make sure that we're not putting any pressure on the firing pin at all. And that's the position you leave it in. I think the spring was modified from the original. I got this second hand. It looks like it's been cut. Someone decided there was too much pressure on their extractor. Probably not a good idea. It feels like there's really not enough pressure left on it now. They probably just had a hard time assembling it and decided that that was the way to go about addressing that particular problem. Not recommended. So in order to get this bad boy back in here, I'm going to get him started, and then we're gonna use another punch to try and help line him up a little. Basically, I'm just looking through the hole in the bottom to see where it comes in. I'm gonna try it like this. It looks like I got it caught, so let's see if we're lined up. Not quite. We're pinching it just a little bit. I'll get a slightly larger roll pin punch because I'm missing. So that is our slide reassembled. Not a ton of parts there to worry about. I'm going to set it all over to the side, and we're going to play with the frame. Frame, I mean, I assume they don't all have this clip design for, in your underwear carry. Not my favorite way to carry a firearm anyway. But in this case, this clip is holding these pins in. The clip is the other side of them. So we're going to take these out and remove the clip so that we can get those pins out. oil in there. So from a what's holding it all together, we look like we have a plastic pin back here. I don't think that's an actual pin. I think that's just a molding mark. These two are not actual pins. And then the front pins. And I think the front pins must be holding it in. It can't have just one pin. So I'm guessing these guys got to come out. Which means I'm just going to use this to push them out, so I don't damage the threads. And then I'll tap this one out with a punch. So I mentioned it's a double action only. And the other thing that's really odd about it is that hammer is being pulled forward. If you can see in there at how the spring mechanism works, what you'll see is that this plastic piece in the back has a big coil spring hooked over it, and the spring is under. It's pulled, not compressed. And so when you're cocking the hammer, you're actually stretching that spring out, not compressing it so that it pushes back like most mainsprings. This is going the other way. It's pulling the hammer forward, which means that this is probably a good time as any to actually get that piece out and get some of that pressure off before we try and take the rest of it apart. So I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. There's a couple different options here. That'll do. Just lift it up and pop it out. At that point now our hammer is dangling, and I can't remember exactly how it hooks on to see if we could unhook it yet. Probably easier to figure out once you get in there. This piece. Nah, we'll worry about that in just a second. Let's go ahead and knock this pin out while we're here. Let's try to see if either of the sides of this pin had any. Oh, well, I guess we're not going to have to hit it with a hammer. So that pin looks like it can just be pushed out. It does have two little indentations there where it goes through the metal. At this point we should be able to get this out of its shell for gentle. So you have to be mindful of the path that spring is going to take. I think it'll just come popping out. Now here's our first little dangerous thing that's not well attached. Is the spring that's the force for the slide lock. I want to hang on to that. And it looks like the trigger bar also has a loose side spring just dangling in there. So I'm going to try and hang on to all that stuff as I pull this free. And that was that was it. So this is the shell. The only thing in here now is the magazine release. I guess technically it is this. It appears to be a. No, it is not an ambidextrous magazine release. This big spring, if we tug that out, that would be the magazine spring. Just like that. And so now this will come out the side, and what you can see in here is how that was working is this spring has one long leg, and it sat in there, and the long leg pushed out against it. This is an all polymer piece, and so getting it back into place is probably going to be a little bit tricky. I'm going to go ahead and do that now while I'm thinking about it. I'm going to line it up so I can see the hole. I'm going to make sure that the long leg goes on the correct side. And then the trickiest part, I suspect, will just be compressing it enough to get it to go in there. And for that, I might be able to just pop it in place with a screwdriver. If not, I'll grab... Oh, looks like it may want to go in. Whoops! Then again, maybe not. See, more than one way to skin a cat. I think what I'm going to do in this case is start the leg that needs to be in there with my pliers. And then see if we can't just finagle the other leg in there with the screwdriver. Oh, thought we had it there for a second. So close. Yeah. So there's more than one way to do that, but once it's in there, again, the spring will want to work its way up. Normally the body of the metal insert is holding it in there. So don't work it too much when it's disassembled. Alright, so now I lost this other spring here, which we mentioned was, well, that's an interesting setup. Alright, so as we go through these one at a time, talk about each one. This is a dual purpose spring, I think. No, doesn't quite come up. Yeah, this is that's all this one does, is it serves to hold the slide lock down. So we're going to lift that off, take it out of the gun. Oh good lord, what have they done? Ah, there's one angle which you can just get this out, but this is a little bit over-engineered, where they bent that sheet metal all the way around. And on the other side, that's different. So through the body of the trigger is moving this little leg here, which is obviously moving our trigger bar. So that part's there. This spring was wrapped all the way around and underneath the trigger bar. And trigger bar has a very slight groove cut into the bottom of it for that to ride along. So trigger bar actually sits in there, that spring in the groove, pulling the trigger bar into the upper position if something were to push it down for the disconnection. That's how that all works. And since this is a double action only, the trigger bar is... Whoops. What did I just launch? I'm not sure what just fell out. So, the spring is pulling the hammer forward, and so the hammer always wants to come forward. And what's going to happen... Oh, you know what I lost? I lost the pivot pin. That's what I lost. That's where this other thing was. This was actually holding my hammer in. Let's see if I can get that back in for demonstration purposes. There we go. So the trigger bar is just going to catch on the bottom of the hammer, this little notch here under the hammer, and it's just going to drag that forward until it just rotates past it. And at that point, it's going to get cammed right off of it and pop down. And since it's double action only, until you return the trigger bar all the way to the back, only then can it pop up behind the hammer again. demonstrate that out of the firearm as well. Now, trigger pin might have something odd going on here. There is a little pin in the bottom of the trigger here, which I have a funny feeling is connected to the trigger pin, so I don't just want to pull it out, because if this is creating tension on it, that would be bad. But this could be completely unrelated. So give me a second here and we'll figure out for sure. Actually, while our hammer keeps wanting to fall out, let's go ahead. I'm going to come back to the trigger in a second. We're going to take this piece apart so that we can get this all the way out. There's a roll pin that goes through this hook, and then this hook will be able to back through the piece of plastic. And I'm just going to set the roll pin in there for now, and that means that this spring can come all the way back out. The only thing to remember is really the position that the hook is to the back side as we tug this out. And so we'll come back to the hammer now that it's not going to keep falling out on us. The extractor will probably fall out on us. So peek in there with a flashlight, see if there's a hint. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty strongly that this thing in the bottom of the polymer trigger is actually a metal pin that's going into the inside to hold this thing in one place on the trigger bar. Getting this out looks like it's going to be a bit of a pain. Oh, you know what? They might have left me another way to do that. Sure enough, on the top side, there's a punch hole. So inside the frame, there's a hole where we can actually line up and knock that pin through from the far side without having to monkey with it nearly so much. So I'm going to make sure that hole's lined up. And with it lined up, let the hammer do the work. Yes. Now this is what I was trying to tug by hand and completely failing on. I think that there's still some engagement there. It really doesn't feel like it's all the way lined up, but it could just be an illusion. Well, that was also going through said spring, so that's what's, well, let's get it all the way apart, and then everybody can see. Okay, so with that pin driven all the way out, now the pin is free to come out. So now you can kind of see all that stuff that was going on at once. So inside this, you had the spring sitting in there, and then that loop in the spring, this pin came up through and held the spring from coming out, and it also makes it so the spring now has that loop is fixed, so this has now got something it can't rotate past. So this is what keeps that spring from rolling around. And then there's no real friction with the pin and just this body. The friction all comes from how it goes through the polymer, and it goes all the way through and out the other side on the trigger. So trigger is sitting here on the whole thing like so, with the pin going all the way up and through. Now the pin is a pretty tight fit in the polymer. The spring is not under stretch tension. It's not being pulled out. It's really just winding itself, around as the trigger pulls. So that's the fairly unique, at least I don't know of anything else that does it quite like this, trigger mechanism of the Kel-Tec. Now, let's see. The ejector, there's a little roll pin in there for the ejector and a hole on the other side so that you could knock it out. I don't think that we have any burning need to take it out. It doesn't really do anything. It just sits in one place. The hammer itself is not going to be overly complicated because there's no safeties, there's no hammer drops, there's no single action. It's going to be pretty much this. The hammer sits pretty much all the way forward. Trigger bar catches it there in this little ridge, and as it pulls it, basically it's going to just be able to pull it straight until this long part in the back here will cam the hammer off just enough so it can slide, so that the rest of it can slide by the trigger bar. So everything else, this is just a roll pin to hold the spring on there, and it's just cut down so that it doesn't get in the way of the rest of the slide. There's nothing else mechanical going on here. It's just pulling right there, and when it gets cammed down too far, that means the hammer can then slide past it and come forward, and it does not reset until you release the trigger bar all the way, at which point it can pop back up into its next pull position. So that's pretty much it. The hammer is retained by this pin, and it looks like they may have actually put a sleeve in it to keep it from wearing out in this aluminum block. There's nothing on the far side, so I'm not sure exactly what their logic was. Probably just without that, it would probably fall apart even faster. Not something I would say is really made to last, but what I've heard about these guns is that they are popular as backup guns for people in positions where that's required, law enforcement, etc. And because they are essentially nearly free, it's one of those where you go out and you buy one, and if you get one that works, it's really doesn't have enough things going on in it that it's ever going to behave differently. So if it's extracting properly and ejecting properly, you've got a good one. And if it's not, it's really not worth it to get it fixed. Just buy a different one, return it, whatever. But what I'm told is that that more than 4 out of 5 of them come out just flawlessly functioning, and it's pretty obvious if you have one that doesn't work quite right. And what people tend to do is just get one, make sure it's one that works, and that's their backup gun. They never have to generally worry about it being unsafe because of the double action. Like I said, I don't really like not having an inertial firing pin, but it's not crucial. So this is kind of a triumph of cheap machining. If you think about what it took to make this. A lot of CNC work on this itself, but the rest of the parts really straightforward. The hammer is your only other real part. Everything else is essentially stamped, with the exception of this unusual trigger rig So these are your 3 parts that have some sort of machining cost. Everything else here, stamped, and everything that's molded polymer, obviously. But compared to almost every other gun out there, with hammers, steers, disconnectors, everything else that goes on and on, this has about as few parts as a gun can possibly have. So we'll give them credit for some of that, Let's see, what do I want to put back together first? I think I'm going to go with the trigger system, since we found some novelty to that. Now the other thing that I gotta be wary of is the correct angle for that. So we know that once we put this pin through, we're locking this leg, and we're controlling where the tension starts. So if I start it with a leg here, now that's with no tension on it, that means I have to start putting tension on it, and I need to get that leg all the way around. So I think that's too much tension, and it's going to break things. So I believe that I am 90 degrees off. So I'm going to flip that around and slide my little pin in here just to hold it as a placeholder, and check. Yeah, so that's better. So there's only that spring, it cuts across the plane of the center of that, so there's only 2 ways it can go. So here and 180 degrees off of here. So I was just trying to figure out which one was the one we want. So that's all we have to remember, is that the leg kind of pointing forward as we assemble. And so make sure that we have the trigger in there, and this piece sitting in there, and as we said, we know that we want our leg kind of on that forward side. Now I'm going to use punch to just line everybody up. So now that punch is coming all the way up through the top. That makes, lets me know everything is in place. And then I just got to substitute the punch for the pin. And check to see if I actually got it in there. I think I did. Yep, we got tension. We move together. We're not bound up anywhere. That's that part. Again, the hammer, in my case, the shiny side is forward. But if you get baffled for a minute at which way the little triangle is supposed to go, remember that the hammer is being pulled forward, not pushed. So in this case, the pin that you're pulling on is going to be in front of the rotating point, or the point of rotation, so on the front side of where it goes through. So keeping that in mind, we drop it in, and we just line up the hole. And what else? So we know our trigger bar is going to want to be under tension. It's going to come down from there. So that's our trigger bar in the correct place. If we pull the trigger, it's going to move. It's going to actually operate the hammer, as if I'm tugging on the hammer at the same time anyway. And on the flip side, I'm going to hold all this in with my fingers. On the flip side, we've got to get this guy back in, and I think we found that that was about the angle, the one angle he was willing to go in at. So somewhere's right around there. There's just enough space to get him onto the inside, and again, he rides on that fat trigger pin. And this spring, the longer leg, is the side that goes down, as far as I can tell. Let's see, if that were backwards, would it matter? I suspect that wouldn't make a darn bit of difference, but I'm pretty sure it came with the long side on the bottom, and that way it doesn't bump into the other side when I close this. Now, we did see that getting this on and off was a little bit of a challenge, and so I'm thinking I'm going to want to reassemble this back onto it before we get it in there. So I will probably lose a little bit of this as I go that I had already assembled, and just keeping in mind that this little nub is the actual backside as we go. And stick this in, the roll pin sits in there, and that holds that whole thing in place. And I believe that we'll be able to grab that with a screwdriver once we get it all together and pull that into place. If I'm wrong, then we'll pull it back apart and come up with a second strategy. I'm going to leave it in there at a bit of an angle now and guide everybody back in, making sure that my springs get on the inside, get good clearance there. Let's see, where did that wacky takedown pin go? I think that this spring here actually does have one other purpose in life, and it sure does. It's the actual tensioning spring. So as well as being the slide lock spring, it's also the one that provides tension because there's a little little groove cut in the takedown, so that actually retains the takedown a little bit. Let's go ahead and slide our plastic pin back in, and that should be enough to hold everything together guts-wise while we see what it takes to get this back in there. And I believe what it takes is to us to get a pair of pliers to get underneath it and hold it evenly, which I did a poor job of. But if I do a good job of it, I should be able to essentially lift it up and get it over to the back of the gun where it will pop into place, just like that. Now I've got full tension on it, so again, these pins hold the rest of that frame together. The reason I didn't take this one all the way off is because it's partially blocked by this clip. I mean, I could, open the clip and get that guy out if I wanted to, but I don't have any burning desire to. I can get in there close enough and get him started. Get his I kind of tightened him up a little more than I should have. Give myself some wiggle room. Excuse me. Come on. There we go. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the sorcery that they used on these pins design-wise is, because normally I would think that as I tighten these, I would expect that these guys on the far, the shaft that they're going into would just start to rotate, but they make enough contact with the metal and the polymer that they hold pretty snug, and I've never had them back off, so there's that. Uh-oh. Ruh-roh. What has it done? Somebody... yes, actually, without the frame on, normally the frame would stop the hammer at about the vertical position, or the slide rather, and so without that, it still kind of stays disconnected. So until you even when you let all the way up, the hammer needs to be back just a little bit for it to actually pop up. And I say disconnected, it's a double action only, so there is not actually a disconnection per se. So, putting our slide back together. Coil springs generally should be in opposite wind directions, so that they don't bind. These guys look a little bent up, but as we keep them straight, it will find its seat in a little groove there on the barrel. And we're going to slide it back on and put it in the lock position. And now, as he said, the barrel's got some play in it where it can move, and what we want to do is look and pull the barrel just about all the way forward, and then we will actually be going through the lug. If the barrel's back here and we try and put the pin in, we'll be underneath the barrel and it's not going to work. So when you're putting it together, make sure the barrel is forward, and then that will go in. It'll click in, that spring the long spring that's operating the magazine release, also tensioning that. Now, long reset because it's the full trigger pull, but it does reset because that hammer doesn't quite go as far forward. So, that is the Kel-Tec P-40. I think it's similar to the P-11 or P-9. I don't remember what they called their 9mm. I'd have to look it up again. So, that's as simple as a firearm can get. I hope you had fun. Stay safe.